At 6:04 a.m. on January 29, 2022, the alarm bell sounded in the Canton Fire Department. Firefighter paramedic Timothy Nuttall knew what that meant. His heart skipped a beat. He raced to his equipment, and he picked up his bag, which was meticulous. There was a sign and a signal, and then there was a voice commanding that there was cardiac arrest. The most serious of calls for a firefighter paramedic, that means that a person's heart has stopped. He didn't know who it was. He didn't know where it was. He took his bag. He had just gotten to the station, and he rushed to the ambulance. He was one of the most senior paramedics that morning. Another paramedic, Anthony Flamati, would be running this mission. He jumped in the back of the ambulance, the door shut, and they headed off to 34 Fairview Road. As they drove, firefighter Nuttall could not see anything. He couldn't hear anything other than the engine of the ambulance. He could feel it sliding across the road. It was near blizzard conditions. He calmed himself. He steadied himself. This is what the firefighters and paramedics are trained to do, to focus. And he focused on his task. He looked around the back of the ambulance to make sure all the tools were in place. The ambulance was meticulous as well. This was Anthony Flamati's ambulance, and it was well stocked. He calmed himself, and he thought about what was going to happen. What should he be looking for? What is his next steps? He played the scenarios through his mind, and eerie calm was above him. As the car pulled up to 34 Fairview, the ambulance, he stood at the back door, the doors open, and he stepped out into bedlam. He could hear a woman screaming and shrieking, the cold, hard air slapping on his face, and the wind, blizzard conditions swirling around him. You will hear him tell you how he trudged towards those screams in the darkness to snow, and when he got there, he saw 3 women surrounding a man lying, not moving on the ground. He walked up to the man, and he reached down, and he tried to find any signs of life, pulse, anything, and he found nothing. And he got up and he walked over to the woman, and he walked over to that defendant, Karen Reed, and he told her that he thinks that that man is gone. And then he heard the yell from Anthony Flamati, the chief, and he said, "Come back, let's go." Because you'll learn that in the cold, even if somebody's heart stops, even if they're presumed to have passed, sometimes you can still save a life. So you'll see on a dash cam video, you'll hear through testimony, he went back to that man who's John O'Keefe. He went back to him, and that crew, coordinated effort, they did everything they could to save his life. They got on their knees, they began CPR, and firefighter Nuttall will explain as he kneeled over John O'Keefe, he looked up, and the defendant approached him, and you'll see it on the video. Now, he wanted any information, because when you're trying to save someone, you want to know, are they on drugs, medication, do they have a heart condition? And he looked up at Miss Reed, and he said, "What happened?" And you'll hear her words through firefighter Nuttall. She said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." And it was at that time, through the words of the defendant, that she admitted what she had done that night, that she hit John O'Keefe. Now, those words didn't mean anything to firefighter Nuttall. They weren't in context. They didn't reconcile with the injuries. It didn't help him in his treatment, so he ignored it. Now, firefighter Nuttall is not a police officer. He is not an investigator. He is not a detective. He's a first responder. And so he takes that information. It was useless to him. He continues to work on John O'Keefe, trying to save his life. You'll see the team put him on a stretcher. And when they lift him from the ground, even though there is snow accumulating, underneath John O'Keefe is simply grass, hard, brown, frozen. And beneath his body lay his cell phone. They bring him to the ambulance, and while they bring him to the ambulance, you'll see on the videos that other first responders speak to the defendant. One first responder, Mr. Flamati, she will say, "I hit him, oh my God, I hit him." And then she was interviewed or asked questions for background information, not a criminal investigation, just background to try to help John. And she was asked questions about his background. And during that conversation, you won't hear her see the defendant was a person by the name of Jen McCabe and a firefighter McLaughlin. And she tells Fire McLaughlin, the third first responder, I hit him. They bring Mr. O'Keefe to the Good Samaritan Hospital, and his body is cold. The doctors work feverishly. They treat him, trying to save him. They try to warm his core. And unfortunately, firefighter Nuttall's first instinct is accurate. John O'Keefe passes. So why are we here today? We are here today because John O'Keefe was killed by the actions and conduct of that defendant, Karen Reed. You will learn through this case, through facts, science, and data, you will learn that on January 29th, 2022, when the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe were in front of 34 Fairview Road, all the way to the left side in that dark corner near a flagpole, you will learn that Mr. O'Keefe got out of the car. He got out and he stood by the side of the road after an argument with the defendant. That argument, that anger fueled by heavy intoxication, you will learn from the science and data as he stood by the side of the road, the defendant in her SUV drove away. She drove at least 35 feet away. The argument was over. It had ended. But then she stopped. She stopped. She put the Lexus into neutral, and she waited for 2 seconds. And the facts and the science and data will tell you that despite the fact the argument was over, she then put the Lexus into reverse, put her foot on the gas pedal, and began to press. Not 25%, not 50%, up to 75% acceleration. There was a light dusting of snow. The Lexus tire spun backwards. She went backwards at least 70 feet. She clipped John O'Keefe. He fell backwards, hit his head, broke his skull. And there he lay at the corner of Fairview Road, on the ground, lying on top of his cell phone, alone. And then the defendant will later tell that when she left, he didn't look mortally wounded. Yet he was. And she simply drove away. Now, before I tell you about the data and the facts and the science, and I walk you through that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about John O'Keefe. John O'Keefe was a young man, a local kid, very well liked, loved. John O'Keefe is the son of Peggy O'Keefe, John O'Keefe Sr., and the brother of Paul O'Keefe. Grew up in Canton, worked hard. He became a police officer. But what you're going to learn, the fact that he worked for the Boston police officer, as a Boston police officer, was just a fraction of his life. It was a small, really unimportant part, because the biggest part of John O'Keefe is he was a family man. Not in the traditional sense. You see, John O'Keefe never had biological children. John O'Keefe was never married. But John O'Keefe had a sister, and she had 2 children. And when the children were 6 and 3 years old, his sister unfortunately died. And shortly after, his sister's husband died. John O'Keefe was a help. He didn't sit by. He saw these 2 recently orphaned children, and he stepped in and he said he was going to raise them. So he put aside his career, he put aside his job, and he moved in with the children and raised them like they were his home. They were his passions, his love. He's a new parent, successes, failures, like all parents. And he raised the children with the help of people in the community, with the help of his brother, with the help of his family. And they led a good life. Enter Karen Reed. Around COVID, the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe reacquainted, and they started a relationship. And you'll hear that even though the defendant had her own home, she was staying with Mr. O'Keefe a lot, 4, 5, 6 times a week. And to most of the world, it was a pretty good relationship. They spent time together. They did activities with the children together. She helped with providing the children, feeding the children. It was a steady relationship until about the beginning of 2022. And then things began to unravel. There was tension. There was arguments. In fact, just a few days before this incident, you'll hear that Mr. O'Keefe asked her to leave. But she wouldn't. You're going to be able to read text messages of their conversations on January 28, 2022, and you will see the tension and the unraveling of the relationship. You will read about the discord between the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe. You will see that when he would ignore her calls, they would become incessant. When he would try to push away, she would come closer. You will read those text messages and you will realize that this was the beginning of the end of this relationship. That night, they decided they would go out together. I want to tell you something about data and science before we get to that night. I mentioned that underneath John's body was a cell phone. A cell phone is an amazing piece of technology. It is like a computer. It carries extraordinary data. And when they found the cell phone, the only companion to John O'Keefe that night, they studied the cell phone, and there'll be some remarkable data that you will use in this case to find the truth. I want to mention 3 different things you will find in a cell phone that are critical to this case. The first is called location data. Waze we've all heard of, Google Maps. Well, at some point that night, John put his Waze on. And Waze is like a breadcrumb that will show exactly where the phone goes second by second. It is the strongest, most accurate location data that you can have. And that night, John was using Waze. It also will have healthcare data. Healthcare data will show when somebody is moving. Sometimes it's qualified as steps, but it doesn't necessarily mean somebody's stepping. Moving their arms, walking, turning. It doesn't show what direction or how far, but it shows movement of a person. Healthcare data. And the third thing, remarkably, will be an expert in this case who found a data file on the phone, and it tracks the temperature of the cell phone battery. That will be critical to your analysis in this case, the temperature of the cell phone battery. And so with that, I want to take you back to the timeline of that night. After the discord, both the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe decided they would meet at a bar called McCarthy's. Now, McCarthy's is a local bar, a blizzard is pending, and people are getting together in a celebratory mood. They go to McCarthy's, and you'll see a video of McCarthy's, and you will watch both Mr. O'Keefe, friends, and the defendant drinking alcohol. And you will count 8 vodka drinks that the defendant drank. They arrived at 8:50, they stayed till 9:45. She consumed at least 7 of those drinks in less than 2 hours. The last drink, you'll see when they leave the bar, she puts it under her jacket, and they walk out and they go to another bar to meet other friends called the Waterfall. They reach the Waterfall sometime around 10 p.m. And when they go into the Waterfall, you'll see a video. And when I said celebratory mood, you will see a group of friends of John O'Keefe, many who are friends with Karen through John, and you'll see them clapping and happy and joyous as they're there. You'll see many hugs between John O'Keefe and his friends and the defendant and many of the people there. And they spend some time together, they're drinking, and they all do a shot. And that will be at least the 8th drink within 3 hours that you consume. You will see from the data, not just the cell phone data, but there's some other very important data, and the other piece of data that goes hand in glove with the cell phone is information on the defendant's Lexus vehicle chips. You might have heard of black box in an airplane, where there's some type of event that captures a small amount of time. Well, that was captured in the defendant's Lexus. That black box information with the cell phone data will tell you everything you need to know in this case. It will bring us step by step through the entire night to the death of John O'Keefe. And so they leave the Waterfall Bar at 12:12, and you'll see that the ignition goes on, to the defendant's Lexus. And both John O'Keefe and the defendant in the car, and they decide that they're going to go back to 34 Fairview Road, where we talked about earlier. They're going to go there for a get-together for one of the homeowner's sons who's having a birthday party. And so as they drive back, you will be able to follow them with this location data. When they go back to Fairview, they don't know exactly where it is, and they get lost. And so John O'Keefe makes a phone call, has a phone call with one of his friends, Jen McCabe. And during that phone call, which the defendant listens to because she recounts it, in trying to get directions, Jen McCabe tells John O'Keefe, it's near Bella's mom's house. You'll learn that Bella, or her mom, was somebody that John had dated before this week. And so as they make their way to Fairview, you will see there's a road that comes down like a loop and that leads to Fairview. They take a wrong turn on the loop, and then they do a three-point turn in the driveway. You'll see the exact precise driveway they turn into because some type of acceleration movement triggered that black box in the Lexus. And that's important because that's 7 minutes before the collision. And you'll see from the waves exactly where the car was. You'll see from the black box the event of the three-point turn in the driveway, and then a return down to Fairview. But before they get there, at 12:23, a truck is coming the other way. And the witnesses in that truck will say they blinked the lights. One of them saw a man and woman in the car, John and the defendant, and then they followed the Lexus because they were going to the same house. The truck stopped at the driveway, and the Lexus, the defendant's car, will appear because of the waves and be counted second to second, never stops. It rolls very slowly all the way to the end of the yard in the corner where there's a tree line and a flagpole. And they reach that location at 12:34:33. And they're in the car and they stay there. The truck waits, they speak to somebody in the house who comes out, the person goes back in the house and they're there for about 5 minutes. We're now down to 2 minutes before the collision. The truck leaves, and now it's just the defendant and John. And while they're waiting outside, 12:27, John gets a text from Jen McCabe. Park behind us in the driveway. 12:29, she texts again. Are you coming in? You'll hear that Jen McCabe and others look out the window and see the defendant's Lexus in front of the flagpole at the far end. It's snowy, it's dark, it's windy, they're waiting. You will know that John O'Keefe was in that car, that Lexus, and didn't move because his healthcare data is not moving. It's not moving until 12:31:56. At 12:31:56, he begins to move. He will have 20 seconds before he falls. 20 seconds. He gets out of the car, the Lexus, and in that 20 seconds, you'll hear that user initiated. He looks at the phone, at the text message from Jen McCabe. It's now 12:32:09. He closes the phone the last time. It will be the last time he uses that phone. From the waterfall bar, you'll see that he keeps it in his back pocket. And at that time, 12:32:09, last user, he has 7 more seconds he will move before he lies dormant the rest of the night. We'll also have the information from the defendant's Lexus black box. The clocks run differently. There's a 30-second variance, but it's right in the heart of that time. And you will see through the data at that time, when he makes his last movements with the phone, is when her car leaves 34 feet at least, stops, neutral, and then shoots into reverse with the tires spinning right towards him, right where he got out. You'll know they're arguing because the next morning she tells the firefighter, I'm sad because our last moments were fighting. She drives away. They said she's made later statements that when she left, he didn't look mortally wounded. He lied on the ground on top of his phone, light dusting of snow, the snow now picking up. And he's just there. It's 12:37. Now, when he's in the car, before he gets to Fairview, the battery temperature of that phone is 77 degrees. 77 degrees in the warm car. Navity's been outside the car for 5 minutes. Drops to 72 degrees. She drives to his house. She makes a phone call at 12:33 after she's left there. She calls again at 12:33 and leaves a message. You'll hear it. And you will hear the anger and rage in her voice. She leaves a message. John, I fucking hate you. Pardon my language. You will hear the simmering. And she leaves that message. He lies on the side of the road. He gets another text message. It's on answer to John McCabe. Where are you? 12:45. Battery temperature, 61 degrees. Stop. He gets almost 40 calls from the defendant that night. His phone rings, but it never rings. You'll hear from an expert that the light never initiates, the healthcare data never moves. Is John alone with his only companion, his phone? At 12:53, cell phone drops to almost 60 degrees. 12:59, the defendant leaves another message on John's phone. Now, she hasn't spoken to anybody. Nobody has spoken to her. But her message is out. You'll learn the message says, John, nobody knows where you are. And this is where the plot in the cover-up begins. The evidence will make clear that she knew he was there. She did not call 911. She did not go back to him. She did not leave an anonymous tip. She left him. The night wears on. It's now 1:07. Battery temperature 55 degrees. 1:14, she calls her mother. No answer. 1:14:53. Battery temperature 50 degrees. The defendant had healthcare data on her phone as well, and you'll hear that it stops around that time. And you later learn that she admits to falling asleep and passing out. But then she wakes. 5 o'clock, she is frantic. She wakes up John's niece, and she is unintelligible. She is yelling, she's screaming, she asks for the niece to call Jen McCabe. She calls Jen McCabe, and you'll hear Jen McCabe recount. Out of a deep sleep, she wakes up and she hears, Jen, 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 screaming Jen's name. John's dead. Hangs up the phone. Jen McCabe calls back. And then she says, what's going on? And she told, well, I left him at the waterfall at the beginning of the cover. She tells Jen McCabe, I left him at the waterfall. Jen calls back and says, you saw you up front. You did leave him at the waterfall. She hangs up. She then minutes later calls another person, Terry Roberts, a friend of John O'Keefe. Someone who's not friends with the defendant, but they know because they helped raise the kids and they interacted. She had nothing to do with the night before. Wasn't at the bars. Was home with her family. She calls her and says, I think John got hit by a plow. I think he's dead. Now, Terry, with that information, calls 911. She calls hospitals. You can hear her voice. She's concerned. Not him. And then she gets another call from the defendant. And she tells the defendant, come to my house. I will help you look for him. And the defendant says, I was so drunk last night, I don't remember anything. Waiting for her to arrive, she learns she doesn't arrive. Instead, the defendant goes to Jen McCabe's house. Terry Roberts, the other friend, then goes to Jen McCabe's house, pulls behind the car. And when she does, she's on Bluetooth, and she can hear the defendant say, my taillight's broken, my taillight's broken. And she looks, and the snow packed in the right taillight, she can see a piece of the taillight missing. The defendant desperately wants to go to 34th Fairview Road, but Terry Roberts takes over and says, we're going to go back to John's house. Maybe he's in the house and you didn't see him. So both cars, driven by Terry Roberts and then Jen McCabe, with the defendant, go back to John O'Keefe's house. You'll see a ring video where you see them go into the house and they look around, and you'll hear about the woman, Jen and Terry, enlisted into this task. Look for John O'Keefe. They cannot find him. And then when Terry Roberts comes into a room, she sees, rather than looking, the defendant simply standing there, staring at the wall. At that point, the defendant insists they got to go back to Fairview Road. They decide they'll take one car. Carrie Roberts is taking charge. She's going to drive. They leave Miss Reed's Lexus and John Keith's driveway, and they drive back towards 34 Fairview Road. Look there. It is blizzard-like conditions. It is dark. They can barely see a thing. And when they get close to the edge of 34 Fairview, you hear the defendant start to scream, "There he is!" Both women look and they can't see anything. She starts kicking the door. The defendant's kicking the door. "Let me out." Carrie Roberts stops the car and lets her out, and she sees the defendant run exactly to where John O'Keefe is in the darkness, just where she left him. Carrie gets out of the car, starts to walk towards where the defendant is, and she sees the defendant lying on a body. She can't tell who it is because the face is still covered with snow. And she comes over and looks, and she wipes off the snow from John O'Keefe's face. She realizes it's one of her best friends in the world is John O'Keefe. And she starts to try to do first aid. They start to move him, and coincidentally at 6:06 when they start to move him, the cold air hits that cell phone battery. It drops from 50 to 43 degrees. And they try, Jen McCabe calls 911. And that's when a police officer arrives, firefighter Nuttall and his crew. And when they lift him, that cell phone battery that is shot down to 37 degrees, Carrie Roberts picks it up and puts it in her pocket, and it immediately starts to warm. As she moves to help get a data, showing movement starts again. At that point, nobody knows what happened. The Canton Police Department come. You can see the police cars and cruisers. They're not sure, so they look in the area where John's body is and find a glass from the bar near his body. They find blood spots. They try to put the blood spots in plastic containers. They don't know what they're looking for at this point. There's no information. They don't believe or know that there's a crime. They just know that John O'Keefe somehow ended up here with the broken glass and the blood. And so that morning, you can see the work of the Canton Police Department try to uncover a little bit around his body to see what they could find, which was very little. And then, Carrie Roberts goes and picks up Peg O'Keefe, tells her the news, and they go to the hospital. They go to the Good Samaritan Hospital, and Carrie Roberts is walking, and Peggy O'Keefe is going to go see her son from her husband. And as she walks down the hall, Karen Reed is also at the hospital. See, there was some reports of maybe she was upset or suicidal, so they sectioned her. They put her in for evaluation to make sure she was safe. And you'll hear Peg O'Keefe tell her she walked down the hall to go see her son. The defendant was screaming, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" As she walked by Karen Reed, she stopped and she said, "Karen, what happened?" And you'll hear that Karen was excited and yelling, "Is he dead?" She stops her excitement. He becomes stoic. He doesn't say a word. Peggy pays respects to her son, and then she has to go back home because she has to tell the children. Now, while she's out, the Canton Police Department sent an officer to the house to make sure the children are safe because they're alone if they're home. And when the officer pulls in, he doesn't notice anything, but you'll see in the dash cam video notices something. That tail light has a big missing piece to it. They can't find the children. Ultimately, Peggy comes home, a friend can take it down, and they bring the nephew home, and he is distraught. And then Peggy hears a knock on the door. It is the defendant and her father. They want to come in. They come in, no condolences to Peggy. And they ask, "Can we go upstairs to John's room?" And she's busy consoling her grandson. They go upstairs. They're upstairs for about 15 minutes. They come down. Quickly they leave. Now they got there from the defendant's father drove his wife and the father to that house. But when they leave, they take two cars. They take the Lexus with the broken tail light with them back to the defendant's father's house. And you learn that when police start getting some of the information, they learn about the broken taillight, they learn information that she had told people that she had hit him. They went down to see her, and on their way down, they decided they would get a warrant to take the Lexus. When they get down to Dighton, where the car is, you'll hear from Trooper Buchanan. He took a look and you can see the missing taillight. They went in and spoke briefly to the defendant. They took the car, they brought it back to Canton. And so what you'll learn from the forensic evidence that will help with the science and data is that not only was the cell phone left behind, but also around that area, broken taillight was littered around John O'Keefe's body. Littered around that area. When they got him to the hospital, they noticed there was a shoe missing. As time went by, snow melted, they dug with excavations, they found his shoe on a little berm on the border between the street and the grass. You'll learn days later when they did a plant excavation, they found his hat frozen into the ground. Ultimately, they would find over the course of 10 days that the snow melted almost all every piece of that broken taillight in that area. His hat, the sneaker, the glass. When the defendant left Mr. O'Keefe behind, took with her something of Mr. O'Keefe called trace evidence. You'll learn on the back of her Lexus, around the taillight area, was John's DNA, and stuck to the side, grasping one last piece of John O'Keefe's head. Now, John O'Keefe fell backwards, hit his head after he was clipped by the car. And you're going to hear from a very renowned doctor, a neurosurgeon, who has treated thousands and thousands of head injuries. And the wound on the back of the head, when he fell backwards, not in the cracked skull, it's called a basal fracture, it created an injury called counter-coup. After he was put by a car and fell backwards and hit his head on that hard rock ground, remember there's no snow, it's just a dusting at this point, the back of his brain hits the back of his skull and bounces up. When it bounces up, it leaves marks showing that impact. And this neurosurgeon will tell you, treated thousands of patients, that this injury, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, is counter-coup caused by falling backwards and hitting your head. When the medical examiner for the state looked at it, they generally said blunt force trauma. They had it as undetermined. And so we brought it to a renowned neurosurgeon who does exactly this. You're also going to hear from an active reconstruction. His name is Judd Welcher. He does not work for the state police or local police. He was hired to take a look at this case and the data. He will come in and explain to you exactly what I talked about, how the data from that black box coincides with the cell phone and the movements of the car, the moments before, during, and after the defendant struck John O'Keefe with her car. Now, just a few more things I want to share with you. There are 3 charges against the defendant in this case. The first one, second-degree murder. When most people hear murder, they instantly think shooting somebody, stabbing somebody, bringing deliberate premeditation. Our honor will instruct you on the law. I'm not going to trample in that area, but I can tell you clearly we are not going to try to prove that Karen Reed tried to kill John O'Keefe. We're not going to try to prove to you that she intended or wanted him dead. That's not second-degree murder. What we'll prove to you is she engaged in an intentional act, driving back at him at that speed, in the storm, in the darkness, knowing that he had just gotten out of her Lexus. She intended that act would cause a plain, strong likelihood of death. That's what will prove to you second-degree murder. Also, operating under the influence of alcohol, manslaughter will prove to you that she drove her Lexus recklessly. She hit John O'Keefe, and because she hit him and he fell back, she caused his death. The third charge is leaving the scene after knowingly causing death. Again, she hit Mr. O'Keefe with a car. She knew he was injured. She left him behind. And he died. That's the whole group. This case will come down to the science and the data. The science and the data that cell phone is the best of historians. It doesn't suffer from intoxication. It doesn't suffer from memory loss. It doesn't suffer from emotion, pride, or prejudice. It is facts. It is data. And that facts and data will lead you to the truth in this case. But after Ms. Reed was charged, she began what you'll learn is a campaign to make public statements. 2020, Nightline, Fox 25, a documentary. And we've had an opportunity to get many of her statements in the footage, and we're going to show much of it to you. And her statements to you will confirm what you already know from the science and the data, what you will already conclude from the facts independent about what she did that night. Her word is simply confirmed that your judgment is sound. And you're going to hear from her own lips in many of her statements, her admissions to extraordinary intoxications, her admissions to driving in the Alexis, her admissions to being angry at dawn that night. And I dare say her admissions that she told. I'd like to play for you clip one. You're going to hear the first of the statements that she made after she was charged.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have tagged him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in drunkenness and in the cold didn't come to again?
And this would have been the moment you dropped him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
Ladies and gentlemen, I simply ask you to follow the evidence, follow the science, follow the data. Ignore speculation, surmise, conjecture. Stay true to the evidence. It will lead you to the truth. That on January 29, 2022, a very intoxicated defendant was angry and arguing about the relationship with John O'Keefe. And after the fight was over, she left, but she brought the fight back to him in the form of her SUV. She clipped him, he fell backwards, he broke his head, and then this man who helped, a lifetime of help, was left at the corner of that yard, left to die with no help. The facts, the data, and the evidence will bring you the truth, and the defendant's own words will confirm everything you've already concluded.